everybody, this is Minus from PantheonPlus, and tonight we wrap up our last video on the Races of Terminus series. So tonight we're going to talk about Dwarves. Now, if you haven't watched one of these videos before, really what they're for is to get some discussion started around the race. We're going to ask a couple questions and answer them here, and then hope that you actually respond on YouTube, Reddit, Twitter, whatever's your thing. Get your thoughts out there about the race. So we're going to talk about what classes they can be. We're going to do a little bit of lore about them. We're going to say if they this rendition of this race actually reminds you of how any other races that are similar have been. And Dwarves are a pretty common race, so we're probably going to have a lot of answers there. And then we're going to rank them on a scale of 1 to 10. And what's important about the 1 to 10 ranking is that it doesn't have to fall into any of those categories we just talked about. Essentially, it's your decision. You could factor it into the races they can be, if you're going to play them, what they look like, are they too short? Anything you want to tie into how you would rate them 1 out of 10, give us your rating and let us know if you're going to actually play them. So we'll go from there. So always what we do here is we start with the lore, just small little bits and pieces. For full lore, you're going to want to go up here and click on the link that just popped up for Chris Kane. Chris Kane will give you a full lore rundown. You can watch it in his beautiful voice and get all the lore you need on Dwarves and many other topics from Chris Kane. He is the authority. I am simply going to take a piece of it. So if you want more lore, check out Chris. So let's just jump right in to Dwarves. So first and foremost, the cool thing about Dwarves in this game is that they are the first actual playable race that made it to Terminus, which is kind of interesting. And that was what they called the Age of Isolation. So they were the first known inhabitants of Terminus from a playable race standpoint. And what's interesting is that their god actually sacrificed his immortality because he wanted to come down and lead his creation side by side. He taught them everything. He taught them all their core beliefs in smithing, battle, the arcane, and developed them into this race that's full of pride and strength and high levels of perception. It's really those details, smithing, battle, arcane, strength, perception, that's really baked into what a Pantheon dwarf is all about. And one of the other really cool things is that as a race that ties into their smithing and battle sides is that god taught them how to fuse ice and stone. And it created a metal which I'm sure across Terminus and when we play Pantheon is going to have its place in the realm, but it's a steel called Cold Dark. And Cold Dark steel is unbreakable, but it's able to be made very thin. They can slice it so thin that this unbreakable steel can actually be cut thin enough to wear as a fabric. And I have a feeling that's going to be a huge part of the smithing culture and different things that the Dwarves are going to bring to the table for armor. And I really like that. I think across most games that you see, Dwarves are going to have that smithing kind of attitude built in. And it goes kind of a step further to talk about this created steel that, again, I think will be pretty important across the world. And the other thing, too, that really ties into the dwarf being the dwarf we know and love is that aside from all these different passions they have in the arts and creation and their history, they are unfailing companions. And that's something that if any game you've ever played, you see a dwarf, they have a mug in hand and they're ready to go jump into battle with anybody and celebrate. And these dwarves are the same in that perspective. They're unfailing companions and they don't change how they feel since the day they were created until now, regardless of all the storms of change and conflict that's happened on Terminus. So it's pretty cool. This is the lovable yet strong, passionate race. And to be honest with you, the way that they're the first race in and how they tie into a lot of the lore through the ages, the Age of Seclusion and all the different ones, the dwarf feels like, in my opinion, the main race of Terminus, which is kind of interesting. Humans usually take that role in a lot of these games, and I really feel like the entirety of Pantheon is started and begins with dwarves. So I really like that they're highlighted because a race like them typically is a side race or a side story character. But in Pantheon, at least from what I'm seeing, I'm going to roll the dice and say this is the main core race that's going to be the heaviest lore-based race and the most important in Terminus. I could be completely wrong. Let me know your thoughts with what you've read so far. So let's go ahead and jump out of the lore. Well, the next thing we always talk about is jumping right into what classes they can play. And dwarves can be bards, clerics, enchanters, paladins, rogues, and warriors. So what we do from there is we talk about, do any of those not make sense? Do they make sense? Well, I think most of them very much so make sense, except one. I'm actually not a huge fan of dwarves being enchanters. Maybe it's because I've always looked at enchanters and wizards and summoners as a sort of intelligence-based class, whereas I look at clerics as clerics and paladins more as a wisdom-based class. And I feel that dwarves are just rot with wisdom. I think that they have so much wisdom in their being, how they're created, their wisdom in battle and the history. I just see them as a very wise race, but not always the most intelligent. They're the first ones going to jump into a battle crazily, right? And let's go. So it's strange to me that they can be an enchanter. It doesn't seem to fit very well. At the same time, I'm not sure that I would really replace enchanter with anything. Maybe my only debate would be a shaman, but even then, I feel like the bard, cleric, paladin, rogue, and warrior fit so well, and everything else feels like it would be a slight stretch to put it in. You tell me. Again, I think it's that whole intellect versus wisdom thing. So when I look at those, then we kind of talk about, well, what class do you think will be most used among the dwarves? And this one is really hard because there's one side of it that says this class will be heavily used because they're one of only two that can be paladins. We kind of talked about humans being paladins a lot because of that restriction. At the same time, though, I really see dwarves as clerics, just that battle healer. And in this game, there's a lot of different things a cleric can do from close range to deal extra damage and do different things like that. So it's not just a healer. Now they're going to be a super powerful healer, but I do think that we'll see a ton of clerics and probably a lot of paladins because of the lock and who can be them. And there is some of that in the cleric as well, as the only other race that isn't a paladin that can be a cleric is a Darkmere. So there's not a huge selection in both those classes, which kind of ties to the fact that you're probably going to see a lot of paladins and clerics. But first and foremost, I would say that I see them mostly as a cleric, and I think I see the human mostly as a paladin. Maybe I have that completely wrong. Maybe we'll see dwarves as clerics and paladins as their top, but you tell me what you think. I think they fit it well, and I think the full armored dwarf is the way to go, jumping into battle with a righteous cause. I like it a lot. I do think it'll be pretty fun to see a bard. Drinking, you think drinking, music, singing, and telling stories all goes together. So maybe a bard would be a cool dwarf, but I still think cleric and paladin will be the most played. So the other part of this that we talk about is, what does it remind you of in other races and other games? Well, dwarves are pretty basic. They're not as basic as humans. Humans are the absolute most normalized thing in every MMO. What's kind of cool in this game is that the dwarves are more ice-driven. A lot of dwarves have lived in mountains and such and been smiths, and they're into battle and the arcane. So a lot of that's pretty similar to anything you see in World of Warcraft or in EverQuest or Lord of the Rings even. But the little added touch that not only do they live in a cold area, that the race actually has a blue tint to their skin from growing up in it and having this god lead them. There's some cool things that Pantheon did. They didn't go quite as generic as humans like we normally see, so I'm going to give them a little bit more of a bump up on that. Not just because of that, but also because they're the first race of Terminus, like I said, so I think that's pretty cool. So we have that down. We have the most playable class. We have the classes listed. What do they kind of remind us of? I guess if I'm going to pick one, I would say they remind me of WoW. Wild Dwarves probably the most, but more important than Wild Dwarves, if that makes any sense. And the last part of it is, where are we going to rank them? So I've given this one a lot of thought, and I'm thinking about all the other races that I've already ranked, so I do have to consider that. So I think I'm going to put dwarves at a 6. I like them. They're a bit better than average to me. They are a little average in the sense of the lore in the basics of a dwarf, but again, first one on Terminus. I really like the fact that they really seem to be the important founder of this planet from the races we can be. So I'm going to bump them up because of that. I'm going to give them a solid 6. I think that's pretty good. So now it's up to you guys. What do you think of dwarves? Do you think that they are the first race of Terminus? Do you think the game is really built on the back of the dwarves like I do? Do you like their class selection? And please tell me where you'd rank them. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please help us out. We are now officially on the drive to 1,000, which is just, again, mind-blowing. I didn't know we would ever get to 100, let alone 1,000, and it's all thanks to you guys. So let us know what you think in the comments, and then we'll wrap up the races, and that's it. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you at PantheonPlus this week.